One of the dumbest things about the religious, and let's be honest, that list is very, very long, is that they figure they can just make stuff up when reality gets in the way of their faith. This is one short example of a very large problem, and you can let me know in the comments below if you see this in your own discussions with the delusional. You don't just get to assume this stuff is true. You actually have to be able to prove it, and they never can. So let's get into it. Today, we're going to do a pretty short video, this one coming from Frank Turek. We haven't done a Frank video for a while because Frank is, let's be honest, a complete waste of time, but as I told my patrons, I found a couple of them that seemed at least minimally interesting, at least as interesting as Frank Turek ever gets, and here we are. This is just an example of the random bullshit that Frank pulls because he really wants these things to be true. But wanting doesn't make for reality, and Frank couldn't care less about that. So let's get into this and see if Frank has any decent points, which we all know he never does because he's Frank, or if he's just making a fool of himself as he always does. Bets in the comments which way you think it'll go, although I think we all know how it's going to end up.
So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they state that when Jesus died, there was 3 hours of darkness. So a lot of scholars, they say like Jesus was crucified on April 3rd, 33 AD.
Nobody knows that. That is like a lot of things that Christians believe, just church tradition, and not all Christians agree. You can't even get Christians to agree when Jesus was born. Some think it was year 0, whatever that means, and some think 4 BCE, some think other things too. The Bible certainly doesn't support Jesus being born on or around Christmas, yet that's what a lot of Christians want to think is true, so this whole thing is just pointless. Just because the church seems to think that they know when this stuff happened, that doesn't mean they do, and it's certain that they have no evidence to support it. Remember, they can't even prove that Jesus was real. This is why I am so utterly unconvinced with any of this. Lots of people have their own personal ideas, but they can't demonstrate a bit of it. They need evidence, and they have none. They just really want to believe, and we all know just how dumb that is, don't we?
Or 33 AD. And during this time, there was a lunar eclipse for 2 hours and 50 minutes, which is close to the 3 hour mark, but that would have happened at night.
Exactly how do you have an eclipse at night? I mean, certainly an eclipse can happen on the other side of the planet, and it will be night on the other, but how would you know an eclipse is going on if it's already dark? Now, yes, you can have a lunar eclipse, but lunar eclipses don't make it dark. Really, let's be honest. And the Bible says it made it dark for 3 hours. And that's not how that works. So that seems kind of stupid, doesn't it? We have no evidence from any other cultures on the planet, including the ones that worship the sun, and they would absolutely have taken notice of any eclipse lasting that long. In fact, the longest eclipse in history, it happened on June 15th, 743 BCE, which lasted 7 minutes and 28 seconds, more or less. At least, that's the totality. So no, there was no eclipse that lasted 3 hours or nearly so. It doesn't matter what it says in your silly book of mythology. That is not how reality works.
The closest solar eclipse that I saw, like a total solar eclipse, was like March 19th, 33 AD. But that ground trace for that eclipse was in southern Africa. So my question is, do you think this was more of like a metaphor of total darkness? Or like, what is your viewpoint on this?
It's bullshit. That's the answer. Frank won't think so, of course, but clearly that's the case. Because here's the thing, we can track every single solar eclipse that's ever happened or will ever happen very accurately, assuming things don't change, and if they did change, it would probably be really bad for us, but as long as things are going on like they do now, we can predict these things very, very accurately. The religious have to insist on magic, since that's all they've got. But we have no reason whatsoever to take their empty claims seriously or find any of it compelling. It's all just bullshit that they just made up in their heads. If they have no evidence, which they don't, why would we believe them? So no, there was no actual eclipse that lasted nearly 3 hours. It's just pure myth, nothing more. Just like the dead never came back to life and wandered around Jerusalem like a bunch of George Romero zombies. The only people who would take that seriously are the gullible morons in Frank's audience who just really want to believe. And those people have problems. But then again, so does Frank. But let's see what he has to say.
Well, would it have to be an eclipse? And does God have to use natural occurring eclipses? Or if he wanted to alter the situation physically to create an eclipse at that time, could he have done it?
This is what happens when you just use magic as your get-out-of-reality-free card. Frank doesn't have to care about the truth here because he can just invoke, "I said so," or "I've got faith," because he knows nobody in his audience will care, at least not the people who are giving him money, which is all he really cares about. This is just dumb, though. Couldn't we just say, well, couldn't Harry Potter just use magic to do whatever he wanted? Well, no, because Harry Potter isn't real. There is no magic, at least not demonstrably so, and it's the demonstration that matters for everybody but the religiously deluded. Yet any religion can pull the same thing, can't they? And in fact, lots of them do. Miracles abound in the religious literature, and only the people who really want those stories to be true actually care. But I only care about the actual truth, not the why not stories that Frank is spinning. Come back when you have any actual evidence for any of this stuff, not God did it, because he likes the idea that God did it. The whole thing is just laughably absurd. Then again, look who we're talking about. Frank wouldn't know reality if it bit him in the ass.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be an eclipse. Like, I guess I was thinking it could have been supernatural, or there could have been very dark cloud coverage during this time.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure if you thought of anything different.
Frank will try anything that gets him where he wants to go. Notice how fast he was to agree to all of that just so he could get off the hot seat. This is incredibly common among the religious. It doesn't really matter what they believe, so long as they get that emotional rush that they're really after. Now, the Bible doesn't really say an eclipse. The best you get is the sun was darkened in Luke's account, which is why this can't be a lunar eclipse, as we've seen other people claim, and there might be another video coming up on that sooner or later. We'll just have to see. That all gets used in some versions of the New Testament, but not all, which shows you just how screwed up the Bible actually is. It's just that an eclipse is the most commonly asserted by Christians who don't understand the actual reality because they don't actually care about reality. This isn't about accuracy and the real world, it's about fifis and faith, and we all know those are completely pointless. The best explanation that I can come up with is that none of this ever really happened. It was a gigantic game of telephone told for decades after the supposed facts, and the faithful were just trying to one-up other religions because that's what happens all the time with these things. We see eclipses used regularly in Buddhism and in Egypt. I mean, the sun god Ra employed eclipses regularly as a manifestation of his power and influence, but that doesn't make any of it true. And that's why you need evidence to back this stuff up. And it's really too bad that Frank has none, right?
No, I mean, I think a lot of times we try and explain miracles by some sort of natural means.
Funny, I think you're doing the opposite. You're trying to explain natural things by miraculous means. You are emotionally attached to your silly religious beliefs, so you're trying to rationalize them by claiming, without evidence, God done it! The reality is, though, whether you like it or not, that we only have evidence for the natural. We have no reason to think that there is a supernatural at all. All the things that man has ever claimed were supernatural, not one has ever turned out to actually be that. It's all natural stuff that people didn't understand or were looking for a comforting answer. That's not real. Reality is what it is, not what you wish that it was, and you people are just making a fool of yourselves. The time to believe in a supernatural explanation is when you can prove the supernatural exists, and not before. This is just Frank dancing around like a trained monkey in front of a live studio audience, and there's nothing to be proud of in that. Nothing at all.
And I think that kind of misses the point, right? If God wants to do a miracle, he doesn't need natural means.
You haven't even proven God exists yet. He's just digging the hole deeper, isn't he? He's just insisting that all the stuff that he already believes on faith must be true. So there. But that doesn't mean anything without corroboratory support. That's really the problem that I have with all of these apologists, I mean, all theists really, is that they just start with the unsupported assumption that everything that they already believe, that's just gotta be true, no evidence required. Sorry, but you don't get to do that. Of course, that's why they don't want to talk to us, isn't it? When you're only talking to other cult members, you don't have to worry about proving anything. You just have to believe and spin a comforting yarn. But for anybody outside of the cult, all the normal people, that's just not going to wash. That's why they're afraid of us. That's why Frank Turek isn't standing up on stage at the American Atheist National Convention. He knows he'd get laughed off the stage, and he doesn't want to do that. Plus, he wouldn't get paid to do it, so there is that. So he sticks with his own kind in the creationist sense and tells them all the lies they can handle while not saying anything too controversial because he knows that's going to negatively impact his bottom line. This is exactly why the religious don't impress me one bit. It's all a scam for dumb people, and that is nothing at all to be proud of.
Like I remember people trying to figure out, how could Jonah survive in a fish? And they tell you the story of John Bartley, who was swallowed by a fish in 18-something. And later, when his buddies harpooned the thing and brought him, to shore, he was still alive in there. Look, it can happen. That's not the point of the story.
No, probably not. But you have to remember that Frank is an evangelical, or at least he graduated from Southern Evangelical Seminary, and he was a big follower of Norm Geisler, who was one of the primary architects of the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, so I'm going to assume that Frank follows a similar line, at least when it serves his purposes to do so. So the story here, it doesn't really matter, does it? If the Bible says it, it's just got to be true as written. So Frank, presumably, believes that Jonah actually did get swallowed by a fish. Now, since he brought up James Bartley, let's look at that for shits and giggles. Bartley, who lived from 1870 to 1909, supposedly got swallowed by a sperm whale in 1891. At least, that's when the story appeared in newspapers nationwide. However, when the story was investigated, it had a whole lot of problems. First off, the ship that Bartley supposedly was on, the Star of the East, that wasn't a whaling ship. According to records that still exist today, there was no James Bartley on the crew. The wife of the captain wrote a letter stating that there is not one word of truth in the whale story. I was with my husband all the years he was on the Star of the East. There was never a man lost overboard while my husband was in her. The sailor has told a great sea yarn. So we have no reason to think that any of this, like Jonah, ever happened at all. Add to the fact that even if a human was swallowed whole, which is certainly possible because sperm whales are known to swallow giant squid, they would never be able to survive in the stomach. Sperm whales have a 4-chambered stomach just like cows. The first, which has no gastric juices in it, has incredibly powerful muscles which crush the food. Bartley, unless he was rescued pretty much immediately, he would have been crushed to death inside that first stomach. If he somehow made it to the second chamber, he'd have been dissolved by gastric juices, and that would have been the end of him. So this is just a nonsensical story that never happened, just like Jonah. This is all religious bullshit.
In fact, Jonah died in the fish, just like Jesus died in the heart of the earth. And so when we try and explain things using natural phenomenon, I think that's missing the point of what's going on.
There's no way to verify what happened to Jonah, since there's no reason to think the story ever happened at all. There are two versions. One that says that Jonah lived the whole time and was just spit up on land, and the second that says that Jonah died and was somehow brought back to life. That's only supported by Jonah 2:2, which says, "From the depths of the grave I called for help." Sorry, but if you're dead, you're dead. And if you're dead, how are you calling for anything? And of course, the author of Matthew used that story to try to give the Jesus tale some validity. I mean, he did that a lot, calling back to things in ancient Jewish mythology and pretending it was all just a giant prophecy for Jesus. And I've pointed that out many, many times before. I just find it funny that Frank is trying to ignore all of the potentially problematic beliefs that I'm sure he holds, but I'm not trying to foist any of this off on him. If he wants to accept that Jonah was a fable, fine, I don't care. I figure that Jesus was a fable too. Where does that get us?
Now, but I like the idea that you're trying to coordinate these things. But I think God could do it, could have an eclipse, even one that wasn't done naturally, if you will.
You still haven't established that God is real in the first place, which of course Frank isn't even trying to do. And this is the problem that we face. If we try to verify any of the supposed doings of his imaginary friend, we find out that most of them are just impossible. Now, you can say, well, God can do anything. But what does that even mean? That's just an empty assertion based on faith and fifis, and we're trying to get away from faith, right? I am not going to take the existence of any gods on faith. I want to see the evidence, and all we can really go by in this case is the words of anonymous authors in the Bible, and none of it can be independently verified with any kind of evidence today. As I keep saying, no evidence means no belief. It's far more likely that the whole thing was just made up in a gigantic game of telephone, and if you want to reject that out of hand, then you have to be able to show that it actually happened with something that you can verify today. And Frank simply can't. That's why I'm so unimpressed with everything that he says, with everything that any apologist says, because you don't get to just start with the bald assertion that everything you already believe on faith is true. Faith is not a demonstrable path to truth, and it's the truth that matters. If you can't get to the truth, then you're just wasting everybody's time.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks.
No, it doesn't. I'm sure the guy in the audience was a believer, just like Frank is, which is why Frank doesn't want to talk to us. If it had been me, I'd have said something along the lines of, no, everything you just said is bullshit. Because it is. I don't play the stupid games with the religious. Put up or shut up. None of this ridiculous, well, it seems to me, based on things they already believe because they just really want it to be true. So what? I don't care what you believe. I care what you can prove, and sadly, these people have absolutely nothing that they can demonstrate is actually so. That's why I started step 1. Prove that your God is real. And if they fail that one, and every single one of them do, the conversation is over. You lost. Next. I'm not interested in your faith. You don't get to start from there and then just pretend it's true because you really like it. That's why just about all of these conversations fail, because they can't go all the way back to square one and justify their beliefs every step of the way. And they certainly can't justify the first one, which is why in any debate that you ever see on the existence of God, the religious side will never even try to justify that. They will just assume it's true and move on from there. But that's just stupid. They have to be able to prove that their points are true. I certainly can for anything that I believe, and I don't do double standards. So go back and prove that your beliefs are rationally justified in some demonstrable way that I can examine for myself. Don't just claim it, demonstrate it. And if you can't, then you've lost. Go back and try again. And that's when they stop talking to me, because I don't respect their faith and their fee-fees, and I shouldn't. Nobody should. That's how reality works. Even Ben Shapiro, idiot that he is, he knows that, except when he doesn't practice it when it comes to his religion. Reality doesn't care about your feelings. Grow the hell up. Let us know when you have, because that would certainly be nice.